So welcome everyone to the second webinar for UN Women's Second Chance Education Program. We're really glad you've joined us today. My name is Sonali Hedich and I look after UN Women's Second Chance Education Project in Australia. So UN Women's Second Chance Education Program has been designed for women who have missed out. They've missed out on an elementary, middle or high school education. They've missed out on employment or missed out on opportunities and a pathway to self-determination because of constrained options due to their gender, their ethnicity or race, or due to harmful social or cultural norms, or having to start again as a refugee or migrant in a new country. Due to a partnership that UN Women has with BHP Foundation, as well as additional support from HP, we are able to deliver a pilot that's tailored to training for women in 6 countries, in Chile, Mexico, Jordan, India, Cameroon, and Australia. UN Women's model is to partner with grassroots organisations that are founded by women with the lived experience and living in the communities that we're seeking to support. Due to these partnerships, we're able to provide tailored, bespoke training to meet the specific needs of the women we work with and leading to outcomes in line with the women's aspirations. A woman may be seeking to improve her life skills or her life situation, to move into a safe environment, for example, or she may be seeking her first job or to start a business. Our physical empowerment hubs, as well as our online training and our virtual support, has assisted 35,000 women over the last 2 years to access training and pursue these pathways. And we will continue to scale up over the coming year. Currently, there are over 500 million women in the world who are illiterate. This is a trend that has not changed in 20 years. For those women who are illiterate, how can they engage with digital technologies to learn, to get access to basic services and engage with their communities online, especially in a lockdown context? Today, in our webinar, we're asking, can digital literacy be used to leapfrog illiteracy? Or to phrase it in another way, can we get women without literacy digitally literate? It's a complex and multi-layered question, but we've formed an excellent expert panel who are here today to help us unlock all the factors we need to consider to respond to this question. So without further ado, it's time to hear from our panel. First up, we're hearing from Dr. Erin Laurelie-Young. She's our keynote and she's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, leading the Women in Data Science and AI project with the Public Policy Program. Erin has a PhD in Education on Learning and Technology from the University of Oxford and a Bachelor of Arts in Classics from the University of Cambridge. Prior to joining the Turing, Erin was an H-star visiting researcher at Stanford University, a researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute, and a consultant at the International Institute for Educational Planning at Unesco. UN Women has invited Erin as our keynote today because she has co-authored a recent discussion paper for UN Women, along with Dr. Judy Wiseman and Anna Fitzmaurice, on the digital revolution, implications for gender equality and women's rights 25 years after Beijing. Welcome, Erin. We're really delighted to have you here today. The floor is now yours, the virtual floor, and to tell us about your important work and to attempt to answer that key question, can digital literacy be used to leapfrog illiteracy?
The title of my talk today, as Sonali said, is Can Digital Literacy Be Used to Leapfrog Illiteracy? I thought I should just give some background on what I'm working on at the moment. It's not completely linked to what I'll be talking about today, but what I'm talking about today forms the foundation for what I work on at the Alan Turing Institute. So I thought it was important just to share this. So as Sonali mentioned, I lead a project called the Women in Data Science and AI. and we look at, well, we use research in order to inform policy, primarily in the UK, but also globally, at increasing women's equality in the data science and AI fields. So obviously this is looking at the frontiers of technology. Everything I'll be talking today kind of forms a baseline and is absolutely key to the research that we're doing at the Turing. Okay, so as Sonali mentioned, I'll be talking around the report that we released earlier this year with Judy Wiseman and Anna Fitzmaurice. And just to foreground what I'm talking about, that, as you know, this topic is huge and I won't really even be able to scratch the surface in 20 minutes. But I thought what I'll do is pull out some of the key findings and conclusions from the report that link to how we can use digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. So the report was a background paper for UN Women, and it looked at the last 25 years of technological advancements and how that affects women's empowerment and women's equality or inequality. And so our premise was that over the last 25 years, since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the rapid spread of digital technologies, so that's everything from the mobile phone and the smartphone, the Internet of Things, right the way to data science and AI, has been pervasive across almost every area of socio-political and economic life across both public and private sectors. So our main argument in the paper is that the digital revolution has brought massive potential to improve social and economic outcomes for women, which is brilliant. But at the same time, it also poses the risk of perpetuating existing patterns of gender and other inequalities. And despite a number of important and really exciting initiatives and interventions and policies in the area aimed at furthering women's empowerment, there's still a significant digital divide and inequalities in digital literacies. And as I'm sure you all know, it's getting worse now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this basically limits the equitable realization of the benefits of the digital revolution across high, low and middle income countries alike. And so in the report, we focus on three areas, which is education, work and social and welfare services. But today I'll be focusing mainly on the first part, which is education, as it's most important for looking at digital literacy. It's also important to know, as I just mentioned, that the paper was written and published just before the pandemic really took hold. And so it's important to quickly reflect on the new implications that our findings and our policy recommendations have in the new environment, in the new era. Obviously, digital technology is now more relevant than maybe it's ever been. And it's been leveraged in a number of really promising ways in the response across all different sectors. But obviously that's by no means the whole story. And the pandemic has not only exposed, but exacerbated existing power structures, inequalities, both online and offline. And so in a way, the internet has evolved to become a key utility and a public good, but is obviously still not available for so many people. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the pandemic has collided with existing and deeply embedded societal inequalities. And so the varying effects of the pandemic are being felt disproportionately by the least powerful among us. And I think that's something, as I'm talking, to keep in mind, particularly with respect to women, who there's been some really interesting research coming out around the impact of the pandemic on women specifically. So, for example, the vast number of frontline healthcare workers and care workers and social workers are women. Unpaid domestic work has increased. There's been a rise in domestic violence, which the UN are calling the shadow pandemic. There's been new barriers in receiving formal education on top of the existing barriers for women, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so this is something to hold in mind as I'm talking, that COVID risks permanently reinforcing this digital gender divide. I'm sure you know this already, but I just wanted to ground my talk in what is the global gender digital divide. So in 2018, it was estimated that women's access to the internet and mobile phones is about 85% of the level for men, and that a total of 1.7 billion women in the global south are unconnected. And then according to OECD, worldwide, roughly 327 million fewer women than men have a smartphone and can access mobile internet, which is what you can see here. But once defined by inequalities to access in digital technology, as you can see in the graph, the digital gender divide is now more about deficits in learning and skills. So of course, there is still an access gap between men and women, particularly in developing economies. The gender digital skills gap is persistent, and that's what we really need to focus on. Because as I mentioned, despite a number of really important and key initiatives aimed at achieving digital equality in digital literacies across both developing and developed economies, the divide not only remains large now, but is in fact, in certain contexts, growing. So I just wanted to quickly jump back to the framing we use in the paper in order to look at gender and technology. So we base our framing, so I'm a social scientist, and we base our framing on a field called Science and Technology Studies, STS, alongside intersectional feminist theory. So I'm sure you know what intersectionality is, but just to once again ground it for my talk, it's the way in which gender intersects with other aspects of difference. So, for example, women who are poor or belong to a minority experience the negative effects of digitalization and what that may bring more acutely. So many discussions of digital technologies, particularly those presented by big tech and the big tech companies, the developers themselves, often make what we call technologically deterministic claims about the technology. So this is that there's an assumption that technology impinges on society from the outside. So assuming that technological change is autonomous and value-free, and it's technology that causes social change. But by contrast, the social shaping approach that we used in the paper understands technologies themselves as socially shaped, not only in their usage, but also in their design, their technological content, and so on. And so which technologies have been and will be developed is fundamentally shaped by the people that are developing it and everything that wraps into this. So their experiences, their priorities, their history, their choices, their values. So an intersectional feminist analysis, therefore, examines the ways in which gender power relations influence the process of technological change and what we decide to develop and how we decide to develop it. Technologies shape and are shaped by gendered power structures. And in this way, it's key to remember that gendered practices mediate the digital revolution, and then the roots of the networks that shape and deploy these different technological systems, whether they're the internet or artificial intelligence. As such, gender-based exclusion and inclusion must be located within these broader structural trends. And so, as I mentioned before, while the digital transformation, while the last 25 years of digitalization holds out the promise of greater gender equality and greater gender digital literacy, you know, for example, the internet has been hailed as a democratizing and emancipatory platform, which of course it can be. At the same time, we need to be careful around the risk that it poses of repeating and amplifying existing gender inequalities. often offline inequalities into online structures. So going back to the digital gender divide, now I've grounded the kinds of theory we use to look at this. So certain gendered norms govern technical participation right across the life course, from the earliest stages of education, right through the workforce, right through after working, and how you interact with different technologies. And this produces absences, gendered absences across the fields and across all stages of technological development. And this reinforces, as you can see in the chart, gender deficits in all the way through the STEM pipeline into future technological development, which risks further construction of these biases and a type of feedback loop. And so on the graph, you can see that lower proportions of women enroll and graduate in engineering and ICT subjects. Girls and women's relatively lower enrollment and graduation in the STEM disciplines, which would allow them greater participation in the digital world and higher digital literacy, perpetuates a cycle of widening gaps and greater inequality, especially in disadvantaged areas. And so education in gender responsive and gender transformative learning environments has a key role to play in helping women and girls develop their digital skills. And I think what's key is gain confidence in developing these digital skills. And so this is the case from the most basic levels of proficiency to the most advanced skills in AI and machine learning. I wanted to highlight this paper I've put on this slide because I think it explains well how the context of developing economies is particularly complex, with myriad and overlapping things we need to consider. So women and girls may not even have financial independence to purchase technologies in the first place or to access the internet. And many might struggle to access public ICT facilities. Their access might be controlled and monitored by men. And so everything I've been talking about obviously has to be taken in this context of access as a baseline to digital skills. But what I like about this paper is, which I'd really recommend for everyone to read, it's not too long and it's just really interesting, is that when attention is paid to the right structural factors, change can happen. So the study on digital literacy that I've highlighted here in Indonesia showed that teaching women how to create content and share information across social media, across digital media, can open up opportunities for not only their professional development, but economic development. And what I thought was really important in this paper as well is that the researcher found that a key thing is for collaboration between a number of different stakeholders in order to help this to happen and in order to raise digital literacy levels. So the collaboration was needed among Indonesian women's empowerment programs, from the government as policymakers and the key builders of the infrastructure in which this education is happening. NGOs as initiators of, often as initiators of women's empowerment programs and groups. And then of course, probably the most important, from the communities themselves, as developers and those who can help to support and expand the rollout of different women's empowerment programs and the technologies which are linked closely to them. And they found this was particularly important for women in rural areas. So I definitely recommend reading that if you have a chance. So I just, once again, I'm sure you know what digital literacy is, but I thought it was important just to revisit here that it's obviously more than simply knowing how to operate a computer. And And I've added here on this slide the Digital Literacy Global Framework by Unesco, which the typeface is very small, but I'm happy to share the presentation after, as I think it's a really helpful framework. And it explains how digital literacy is having the ability to find resources, to critically evaluate the resources, create new resources. In other words, it's a necessary life skill. And I argue that the best way to frame digital literacy is through its promotion of democracy. So basically, digital literacy promotes democracy in a few different ways. So for women, it can foster economic participation, entry into the labour market. For often illiterate women, it can provide access to finance, financial opportunities, mobile banking, through, for example, text messaging systems. It can provide community and political engagement, opportunities for activism and collective action. And then, of course, it can provide access to information and different communication opportunities. So now I'm really coming to the title of the talk. As such, in all these different ways, digital literacy can offer leapfrog opportunities and help empower women, essentially giving them ways in which to bypass some of the traditional cultural and mobility barriers they face offline, particularly in low and middle income countries, but also in high income countries. And there was an example that I found quite poignant, which was that women unable to join the demonstrations during Sudan's protest movement, particularly rural women who are typically constrained by patriarchal structures, recorded and shared their support for the movement on social media, so on Facebook and Twitter. And then another example I thought was important to mention was that in Rwanda, and this was the figure as of a couple of years ago, so I'm not sure what it is now, but over 3,500 women farmers are now connected through mobile technology to information markets and finance. And a key point about this example as well is that the way in which these women are given the financial education is not through the traditional formal educational channels. And research has found that the most important points in which to teach women this kind of financial capability and financial information is at the key points in which they need it. So they call them at the teachable moments. So I thought that was really interesting. So essentially prioritizing women's digital literacy in these ways by combining mobile technology with existing welfare programs, if they exist, can potentially empower women. And another important point I just wanted to mention as well is that digital literacy allows many women to, or can allow many women to join the gig economy because it allows for more flexibility in work. And that's what a lot of the literature says, but I would say to just be very careful when looking at this, because efforts need to be made to ensure the flexibility doesn't occur at the cost of reduced job quality. So, for example, less pay, less job security, less social protection, that kind of thing. I wanted to highlight a few of the really, really great grassroots examples and examples of initiatives through NGOs. And I deliberately, there's a few examples from big tech, so places like Google and Facebook, but I've found, and I think you all agree too, that grassroots and initiatives by NGOs work much better and have much more of an understanding of how technologies and infrastructures work in the communities that they're trying to reach. So here I've highlighted three really interesting and exciting educational initiatives for lifelong distance learning and training. And this is particularly important, as you know, during the current pandemic, when so much learning has moved online, and we want this online learning to be available for as many women and girls as possible. The first one is a really interesting project called Making Ghanaian Girls Great. And it's Ghana's first interactive distance learning project. And it uses solar and satellite enabled distance learning infrastructures. So kind of bypassing a lot of the traditional digital infrastructures to deliver interactive learning sessions, not only to the students and the younger women, but also the teachers, communities and government officials. The second one I've highlighted is a project called Calibri. I'm sorry if that's not pronounced correctly, but it's created by Learning Equality. And it's a set of tools for low-income countries that are, the key thing is that they're open source. So they can be accessed by everyone, essentially. And then the third one I've highlighted is an initiative called Tiger, which is These Inspiring Girls Enjoy Reading. And it's been built by the Open Learning Exchange, OLE, and it's targeted to Syrian refugees in Jordan. And this is for girls and women. It's also important to note that there's no large-scale systematic review of gender, lifelong learning, and technology, which would obviously be really, really helpful when looking at this. But so there's a gap also, if anyone wants to fill that gap, that would be really, really great. But individual cases are really promising examples of ways in which digital tools can help promote gender equality across educational systems and raise levels of digital literacy. And then here I also wanted to highlight some really interesting broader vocational and educational initiatives. So the first one, Mirror Channel, is really, really interesting. So it's a general healthcare information delivery service available, I think it's just in India. Or actually, I think it's elsewhere, but primarily in India. But it specifically targets women who live in rural areas and have few resources. And the way it works is it adopts what they call an edutainment model of education. And it's to promote health around critical issues. So the way in which they engage often low literate women, essentially the way the app works is the content for the app is in one window, and then in the other window, the content is accompanied by different pictures and pictographs and graphs and simple text. So semi-literate and low literate women can easily navigate the menu and easily navigate the app. And the emphasis on the pictures is also supplemented by audio, so that the same content can be conveyed to women who cannot read. So I think that's a really, really key and promising example. The second one is Barefoot College, which isn't super technical in the way that some of the other examples I've presented are, but I think it's important because it's more to do with the underlying infrastructure, which is key when we're trying to raise levels of digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. So it's a women-centered global network dedicated to sustainable development in communities where poverty exists. And then the third example is a platform called She Trades, and it is primarily for women entrepreneurs and women business owners, organizations and companies to connect with and learn from each other, and crucially to access distant markets where women might be in rural areas and lack that connection and mobility offline. There's also a really interesting project which I also didn't put in here because I only found out about it last night, but it's called the Digital Gender Gaps Project. And I saw an early iteration of it a few months ago, but now it's really, really interesting, and it aims to track progress on gender inequalities in internet and mobile access and usage in real time. And so essentially trying to measure women's participation in the digital revolution. And this is one of the key and I'll come to this at the end of my talk, but this is so key because there is so little data, quality data collected and accessible around what we're discussing. It's so important to have initiatives like this to help us understand better the problems that we're trying to tackle. Addressing the barriers to gender equality in digital literacy obviously requires critical understanding of each country's separate economic, political, social, cultural climates. Essentially, there's no one solution to closing the digital gender divide and to using digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. And remedies obviously have to be grounded in contextual evidence about which barriers are at play across different countries. It's also really important to note, and we noted this in the report, that growing investment in digital technologies in the education sector in particular sometimes risks replacing traditional investments in physical and human educational infrastructure, especially in developing economies and rural areas that will typically struggle with teacher shortages. So I just wanted to end on some updated policy recommendations. So at the end of our UN Women report, we provided some policy recommendations based on our findings, but I've now had a chance to reflect on those recommendations, particularly within the context of the pandemic. And essentially, technologies can provide many, many opportunities for women's empowerment, but obviously technology alone cannot address the systemic problems that drive the digital gender divide and drive lower levels of women's digital literacy. So if we're looking at governmental responsibility, the focus needs to be on concrete policy actions which foster women and girls' full participation and inclusion in education and in the digital revolution. But at the same time, it's really key that we address such deeply ingrained stereotypes, practices and norms that lead to discrimination and violence against women in general. So basically, plainly put, without digital literacy, digital access does not empower women and girls. And in our opinion, without a major escalation of gender sensitive and gender transformative policy efforts and crucially investments, we risk a lot of the benefits of technologies being captured solely by men and privileged women, further deepening the gender divide. And so these policy recommendations span long-term structural changes as well as short-term approaches. I also just wanted to highlight another example of a really great initiative which is collecting gender disaggregated data around COVID-19, which, as I mentioned, is so important when we're thinking about not only digital literacy for women, but all women's issues. Yeah, so I've provided, and I'm sure Sonali will be happy to share, I've provided because this is just such a huge topic, I couldn't even scratch the surface. I provided a list of really, really great reading and resources, particularly written by women on the ground in these areas working on these problems, which I really recommend that you would read. Thank you.
We're going to move on now to our next speaker on the panel. It's Anna Chiara Del Prete. She's an Italian national and an academic researcher. She holds a PhD in educational technology from the Rovira i Virgili University of Tarragona in Spain. She holds a European Masters in Local Policies, Gender and Development from the UAM University, and a Masters in Communication and Multimedia Technology by the Corup of Turin. Anna Chiara is the author of numerous journal articles and book chapters in the fields of gender studies, educative technology, and citizenship. We've invited Anna Chiara to our panel today to talk about her PhD research, where she focused on women of older age in rural areas with low literacy and low unemployment in Colombia and Spain, seeking to explore how to build the digital literacy of these women. So Anna Chiara, we're welcome. We're delighted to have you. Thank you for joining us.
The project Technology in a Heritage of Memory was carried out in 2006 in the framework of a European project Equal. The ability to overcome barriers that lie between women and technology has been one of the main challenges undertaken by the researchers and the women participants as a result of insufficient training and cultural stereotypes that still remain in our society. The project focused on the elderly women in the rural regions of Montsià, south of Catalonia in Spain, and Norte de Santander in Pamplona, Colombia. We were working with the local women association in total of 12 municipalities, and the study group presenting common characteristics that influence their quality of life. The first variable is unemployment, which leads to a high rate of inactivity generated by weak economic activity in the region, or by difficulties in entering in the labor market resulting from the process and productive diversification. Another interesting aspect is relative to the level of literacy among these women. The rate of illiteracy in the study regions keep on diminishing gradually over the year. However, it's continued to increase among adult women. The majority of women presented technophobic, the fear or dislike of technology or complex device, especially computer. The participant women presented the first level of digital device, mainly based on the difficulty to access to internet and computer. Thus, it was necessary to cooperate with the university and the municipalities to have access to classroom, computer, and internet connection. The study's main objective was to empower the participating women through information and communication technology use, to reflect on their individual role played through their own life from childhood to maturity, and to communicate this reflection with other people. The methodology used worked on two levels. The first one was the participant research, and the second one was on the gender perspective. We used three specific research instruments that helped us to build data. A questionnaire designed to help collect personal data and the level of digital literacy, the discussion graph, and the semi-structured interview to cross-checking the information obtained. From the training experience, it can be stated that the self-concept is the first subject to positive transformation. In fact, the insecurity and the low self-esteem that women showed during their first computer approach was clearly visible. Traditional isolation has generated a need to be recognized by their peers and educators. During the workshop on the internet surfing and the word software, a great deal of support and positive encouragement was essential to reinforce of conviction they could complete the task. At the same time, the training went behind providing digital literacy skills and allowed these women to achieve other personal goals. Through the section, it was observed a high level of cooperation between the participants, along with a strong sense of mutual support. What emerged is the importance for those women to tell and compare their different experiences in order to find a common feminine identity. This process of sharing and retrieving shared memory was essential to ensuring a relatively long-lasting motivation throughout the learning ICT. The product as a result of the ICT ability acquired by women contributed to recovery of historical memory. Through the discussion that took place in the course of workshop, women reflected and discussed Uses such as work, education, religion, family, and other factors that have evolved over time and altered the role of women in society and family. Such discussion led the participants to envision a new role for women in sociocultural development of its environment. Technology itself is a no creative communication process, but calls for other items or action that complement and give meaning on the time spent using technology. The access of ICT is not necessarily guaranteed by having a better computer. The access is also about the opportunity to make use of ICT, to which specific knowledge and interest is required. ICT literacy is essential for helping older women to take advantage of information society and the process to keep their mind active and alert for new learning. Overcoming the basic digital barriers lead these women to feel part of a new information society. Learning to use could make the women feel valued and appreciated outside their private sphere. The use of purpose and the process of cooperation and sharing allowed for faster, significant learning. The double challenge for digital inclusion policy is therefore to promote both instrumental skills and the construction of meaning with respect to ICT. Two dimensions that interact to set a different form of appropriation. Active aging now is one of the main references in the policy aimed to older people and represent an interpretative framework that strengthens feminist efforts to support the need for older women appropriating and adopting digital technology in their daily life. This is not only to improve their quality of life, their income, their education, but also to recover historical memory, to participate in the construction of knowledge, to make visible the knowledge and the role of women in the society, to empower women victims of all forms of violence, and to ensure a second chance education and vocational learning. Thank you very much.
That was perfect. Thank you. It was really interesting to listen to. I was, really appreciated your points around the support that's required from facilitators, teachers, but also the peer support from friends as well, and talking about the importance of the motivation for learning. It made me reflect as well, I suppose, on what Erin was saying in terms of how gender shapes technology and shapes what we're putting in and what's coming out, and having these women contribute is so important to shaping what's there and what's forming out what's online and the future of technology as well. So your work is very valuable. We're going to move now on to Ina. Ina Vergara is originally from Chile. She completed her studies of fine arts and architectural lighting design before shifting her life and coming to live in Melbourne in 2015 with her husband, Jorge, searching for new opportunities and a new life together. I hope I've said his name correctly, Ina. Today, Ina is the eHub project manager at SisterWorks, which is a civil society organisation based in Melbourne and Bendigo, Australia, that empowers refugee and migrant women through work. SisterWorks is one of UN Women's implementing partners in our Second Chance Education program in Australia, and Ina has a really vital role in the project. She's responsible for the establishment and coordination of an eHub, an electronic hub, which has been just so vital over the last 8 months as Melbourne experienced the strictest lockdown conditions in Australia. So welcome, Ina. We're really excited to have you to tell us about the innovations SisterWorks has been undertaking to bring women with limited literacy into online learning. Could you begin with telling us more about SisterWorks, please?
So SisterWorks, through work and entrepreneurship, SisterWorks' mission is to support women who are refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants so they can improve their confidence, mental well-being, sense of belonging, and economic outlook. Our vision is an Australia where all migrant women are given opportunities to become economically empowered. That's an image from one of our workshops at Bendigo Empowerment Hub. So pre-pandemic, SisterWorks and the UN Women identified the need that all of these women had of upskilling and the digital literacy. And the thing probably that we most noticed, it was that many women could not come to our physical empowerment hubs because of commuting, or they didn't have money enough to pay the public transport. They had family at home where they could not leave the children, and they could not attend the face-to-face training. With that was that the women that we support have very, very little English skills and digital literacy. So it was a bit of a difficult situation of how we were going to support them. And then we noticed that they all have phones or tablets, and they were happy to start exploring and looking into these different tools. So this was a great opportunity for us to teach them how to improve their digital skills and to be able to give them tools so they could explore and upskill. We looked into other platforms that could fit the English skills that our sisters had, and also that they could access different learning opportunities in a simple way. And we couldn't find that tool that would fit. So we were thinking, okay, we should make something specially made for them, where they could kind of open the phone, easily navigate and watch videos, attend classes, and have all of this in only one platform. And then with all the pandemic restrictions, this made it a bit stronger, and we had to jump directly into the online learning with them to be able to support them. That's one of our online classes where the sisters were participating. So how was the design process of this app? So the idea was to make an app, as I mentioned before, where we could have a prototype first of how we could better give this tool for the sisters, as I mentioned before. Sorry if I'm going a bit round and round with the same ideas. And probably that was the most challenging part of the whole process until now, was how are we going to make this tool as simple as possible so the sisters can understand it, want to engage with it, and go easily into the different tabs that we wanted to create in and learn from this same tool. So we started creating, we had first a workshop where we decided the different pages that we needed for the app, which were going to be the illustrations, what were going to be the icons that we're going to need, how we were going to separate all of these, all of the SisterWorks model. So I'll explain a little bit first. SisterWorks model is based in, so we decided to divide it into 4 different labs. The first one is present support that has all of the content specifically curated for the sisters that have been newly arrived to Australia. They do not know how to navigate in Melbourne. They do not know what is Centrelink. They do not know how to use public transport. So it has a lot of well-being videos and ebooks and everything that they can kind of attend on their present support. Then we have the craft and cooking lab, where they can go in and learn different craft skills, sewing skills, cooking skills, recycling skills, all of these things that are going to be very useful tools for them to learn and to search for a job in Australia. And then we've got other useful skills that are digital skills, so how to create an email account, for example, or how to use Microsoft Word, all of these things that are very, very useful to join the workforce in Australia. And then we have future pathways that are, it's mainly focused in what the sisters need to develop their own business, to find a job, leadership skills, marketing skills, all of those things. So that's how we divided this up at the beginning. And we started mocking up and doing lots of focus groups with the sisters face-to-face previous or just before the lockdown started. And then once the lockdown started, we had to reinvent our model, and we started going to the sisters' houses outside. So we were kind of, okay, I'm outside. They came out, and with a social distance, we were showing them the XD, Adobe XD mockup, that it was like, it would work like an app, but it wasn't the real app, and getting feedback from them. Do you understand how to navigate it? Do I understand the illustrations? Do you understand this button? What would you like to see in this app? What would you like to learn? And probably that was the key part of all our app development process. And having always in mind that our target women are women that really need to kind of have it very, very simple and organically. So yeah, that was probably the most challenging part and how we started creating our app. Well, we learn a lot. Probably what we most discovered is that they were really, really wanting to learn new skills, more focused in craft skills. They really, really enjoy that. And the other thing is that probably the online learning also, and this is part of one of the requests directly from the sisters. And the other thing is COVID kind of accelerated the whole process, is that as we couldn't support the sisters more in our face-to-face training that we had in our empowerment hubs, we needed extremely urgently to have a tool easily for the sisters to be able to access our training. So we created another part that wasn't considered at the beginning, that it's a live class and live courses section, where we daily deliver online classes and courses that go from 4 to 8 weeks, where the sisters can easily, it's something like when in Instagram you see a live story, it works pretty similar. You just click over it and you're into the class. We use Zoom for that. So then the sisters can participate, write down. And also there's some sisters that do still prefer to use, if not the phone, that most of the sisters are using the phone through the app, but then we can provide them with the Zoom, with the link of Zoom, so they can access it directly from their computer. So we've got these two different ways of providing them the online training, which was impressively well appreciated by many of them. And nowadays we have had lots of interviews with them, and it's impressive the feedback that we get, saying that they are so grateful in some way of COVID, just because SisterWorks shift to this blended education of having this online platform where they can now jump in, attend the class while they're taking care of their kids at home, for example. So that's probably one of the things that we most learn, and we're still developing. We really want to, sorry, that's one of the photos I forgot to shoot, one of the photos of the focus groups that we did once we were doing social distance. That's the app. I kept on going instead of showing the slides. So you're more than welcome to get into it and download it from your App Store and Play Store. And what do we see on the future? So the plan is to keep on improving the web app and rolling out new features like gamification, community board, a directory of services where the sisters could go in and look for housing, law, different services that they need near their area. At the moment, we are still collecting data as we haven't done yet the official launch that we're going to do early next year. We're still collecting data from the sisters on their feedback and what else do they want to see and everything. So then we can implement. We will be running mobile hubs and introducing the app to new women to get them registered and hopefully on board to work on online and face-to-face training, and also presenting it to all of our partners so they can spread it on through their networks and just make sure that this is not a SisterWorks app. This is an app that we really want all of the women that are struggling in Melbourne and in Australia, and hopefully after in the world, for them to use and be able to come in and have easily access to the videos that are very slow-paced videos, simple with slow voiceovers and easy subtitles where they can learn English and learn different skills from this app. So they can kind of spread the word and share it with their friends and learn new skills from that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ina. We've run out of time and we haven't even got to talk about the great work SisterWorks does in terms of that content creation that's appropriate for the sisters that you work with as well. So maybe during Q&A we can talk about that. We're going to move now on to Kaylika Castine, who works for the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, in its Division for Prosperity. Kaylika is the Instructional Design and Innovation Officer. And in addition to that, she's also a PhD student at the National Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Otago in New Zealand. Kaylika has been with UNITAR Hiroshima office since 2018. That is my neighbour over in New Zealand. And she has 7 years experience in teaching as both an international teacher and a certified public school teacher in Hawaii. She's lived in so many great places. So Kaylika holds a Master of Science in Education from Johns Hopkins University. So welcome, Kaylika. It's a pleasure to have you here today. And we're also going to talk about an app with you as well. So I understand UNITAR has a partnership with an edtech company called EdApp. Can you please tell us about the purpose of that partnership and the app?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the introduction. So UNITAR stands for the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. We primarily deal with adult education and training. And so within our division last year, actually prior to the pandemic, we had been looking at ways to do blended learning with our programs. And so we were investigating different apps. And in particular, we wanted to find something that we could roll out to participants that would have downloadable features, specifically for places that are lacking in internet connectivity, so people could go to community centers to download things. We wanted the app to also be active, so elements of gamification. We didn't want our users to just be passively watching videos, but to also be engaged in the content. And we also looked for something that was primarily more based in micro-learning, so short, quick lessons. Usually our lessons are under 10 minutes long. And so we're doing chunking that way to kind of just give little bits of information and kind of break down big topics into kind of smaller understandable ideas. So that was our kind of primary motivations as we were going out and looking for apps. We came across an app called EdApp. And after exploring it with them, we actually entered into a memorandum of understanding. And so we've been working with EdApp, and as the pandemic started, we were quite grateful. We'd done a little bit of work because we actually ended up switching over fully. So we used to deliver our programs face-to-face. Usually our programs were about 30 participants, and people would be able to come and meet regionally. So we'd have about 4 meetings. People would meet in their regions and in their home countries, and then would also come to Japan to learn a little bit about Hiroshima, and depending on the program, kind of gain some other understanding and experience from that. We also would take some of our participants to some of the areas that were affected by the tsunami in 2011, just to see kind of the recovery process there from natural disaster. So using our location and kind of sharing that in a field trip experience. But with borders closed, we had to switch to using fully online, which has been, actually, it's been difficult, but it's also been great. As kind of was mentioned in the keynote speech as well by Dr. Young. You know, there are some really great things, I think, to kind of this digital, switching to digital literacy and everything being online. We're able to scale a lot bigger. So whereas we were only catering to 30 participants, we can now reach a lot more people. It was always very sad to have to turn down people because we just didn't have enough money to bring everybody that we really wanted to bring to these physical locations. But now we're finding ways that we can actually bring, you know, it's pushed us to find ways to bring kind of these other experiences in and bring them into this online space. So on the plus side, we've been able to, some of our programs, we hope in 2021 to have 1,000 participants. And this year we're doing hundreds. So we're quite excited about that. And that's been our journey kind of so far with EdApp. We do have another kind of great feature I'd like to mention with EdApp, and perhaps it would interest those who are participating in the webinar today. We also have a partnership with them for Educate All. If you type EdApp Educate All into your web browser, it's a great, you can create, so it's a platform free for anyone to use to either create and upload lessons, to modify lessons, and to take lessons yourself. So it's a growing database of user created content. Of course, our programs are also run on kind of this business side of the app, where we do our kind of internal programming and courses, but there is a great resource out there that has kind of come about through this partnership with Unitar, where there's a lot of course creation happening. So it's really exciting. Yeah, definitely. So this digital pivot, we've been trying to take elements of our face-to-face and kind of reimagine them in this digital space. So our face-to-face programs actually had mentors who are usually alumni from previous years of the program, and coaches who would come in each year. And so we've actually been making learning communities within this space. So just small discussion groups for people that are led by our coaches and mentors from previous programs. So that's a really great way for people still to connect, and people are connecting even outside of EdApp and touching base with each other. And that was, I think, something, again, that happened in face-to-face as well, but is now just switched to phone calls instead of being able to meet up, say, in a regional capital or something like that. And we've also been partnering for 2021, we're looking to partner with ministries and NGOs, particularly in Afghanistan. We're doing an upskilling, reskilling program to teach women in Afghanistan digital literacy skills and some advanced skills as well, such as coding. So we kind of have two split bits there to that program, where some of it will be basic and some of it will be a little bit more advanced. That program, we're hoping to reach 1,000 women, and we're reaching out to universities, NGOs, and again, ministries to try to find community centers where people can go to download some of the content and then complete it at home, but also have support networks there internally kind of within their communities to be able to complete some of it. As was mentioned, encouragement and kind of having that positive environment is so important. And I think being an online learner can be a very lonely journey. And so it's really great when you have a community there to kind of boost you up and to encourage you to keep going, you know, throughout the weeks of the course. Yeah, so this is, we have an interesting example to use in this case. And I think I'd also like to mention, we're not limiting some of this information dissemination to just digital forms. So we're also looking at kind of creative ways we can deliver content. Due to the digital divide, I think across the world. We noticed even school children had to resort to picking up homework packets in some places if they could. So we're considering paper delivery for some of our programs where we have to, just to be able to get information out and to still reach people. We're also exploring radio as well for 2021. And then we have kind of an interesting case as well that happened this year in 2020. We were able to get some grant funding for VR goggles for our disaster risk reduction program. That program focuses on small island developing states within the Pacific. And one of the features of that program when we were in face-to-face was that people would be able to come to Japan and to kind of see what the recovery process had been like in Japan, recovering from disaster, earthquakes, and tsunamis. However, going into an online space, we felt that kind of just pictures on their own didn't do justice. So we're able to apply for grant funding to use VR goggles to deliver some of the content for that program. The program is midway through, so the VR goggles will arrive to people. We're taking a holiday break, but in 2021, some of those will be arriving, and we're really excited to see kind of the potential from that, how that might excite not only the people who are participating, but also the people in their community. We have women participating in that program specifically who are working even in schools as teachers. And so seeing how they might be creating ripple effects and being change makers and introducing some of this technology to students or family members and general community members is really kind of exciting. So we hope to see how that goes, and yeah, kind of wanting to test new technologies in this space, and kind of the excitement, I think, around something like VR goggles provides kind of an interesting gateway to looking at some of this content.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, yeah, we'd be very keen to learn from you as to how it goes as well, because it could be an exciting thing for us to do. I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but I've seen VR used very effectively for people that do not have literacy, but to train for particular job sites. So for example, they can simulate being on a mining site, for example, and learn their role through VR before going in place. So it does present a lot of opportunities there. We're going to move on now to Kanta Singh. She has over 25 years of experience in the management of pro-women development programs. Kanta has worked with national and international organisations to promote women in the formal economy, sports and politics. Yep, sports, because Kanta is actually a former national level volleyball player, which is very impressive. Kanta's last assignment was with the United Nations Development Programme, where she spent 9 years, and currently she is the country program manager for UN Women India, where she works on education, employment and entrepreneurship opportunities for women. She's heading up our Second Chance Education program for India, and she's here to tell us about how UN Women is working to tackle the digital divide through our Second Chance Education program. So welcome, Kanta.
Thank you very much, Sonali.
I'd like you to start, please, by giving us an overview of digital connectivity in India. How many people are connected? How do they connect? What devices do they use? And how many people aren't online? And as well, of course, what does that look like in terms of the digital divide in terms of gender?
Yeah. Thank you, Sonali. And before I start rattling the numbers, you should know how many we are in the country. We are about 1.3 billion people overall. And as you must be hearing stories that India is one of the fastest growing markets in terms of digital space. And it includes both internet services as well as mobile services. In the mobile services, we have been increasing by almost 30% every year. So that means 150% growth in last 5 years. We are almost, I don't know how to say this numbers, I know in crores, but almost the whole country, if you look at the numbers, we are hugely connected. But, and particularly, in fact, before I go to the but there, let me just say some positives where most of the young people are connected now. 79% males have mobiles, 63% women have mobiles. We also have internet usage, which is going up every month, particularly during the pandemic. But even now, 42% males use internet, and I would say 21% women use internet on a regular basis. But if you link this with the literacy levels, there's a stark contrast. So literacy rates are going up in India. You know, 80% men and 70% women are literate now. Then we can question the level of literacy, but the numbers are rising every year. So overall, 77% literacy rate in India. Um, but you can't say this is a uniform growth even in the internet services and mobile services. There are regional divides. There are gaps in rural and urban areas. There are gaps in unreached and reached areas. There are gaps in, of course, men and women, and there are several factors that impact the uses of internet and also mobile services, particularly for women. Some of those services are critical, but they are not able to access them. And access to devices is one of the things. If there's just one device in the family, generally it is used by the male member. Even though a woman has access to that, she still doesn't control it. So using it for learning purposes is a big deal. And also, of course, data services are very cheap in India. And in the fintech services, finance and technology services, India has really grown big. Just the other day, I was listening to Bill Gates, and he's saying India is a great example to learn from. And we know it, the way we connect to each other now, the way we speak to each other, the way we learn has changed, particularly during COVID, because all the schools, colleges, technology institutes, everything is now on internet. And of course, not everybody is able to access those, but at least we have started the journey in that direction, in the digital direction. So that's where we are. So Odisha is one of the eastern states in India, and we, under the Second Chance Education Program, we are working in 4 states. And in the 4 states, we are working in 3 districts in each state. Some of these districts, in fact, 8 of these 12 districts that we are working in are called aspirational districts. And when I'm saying aspirational districts, these are some of the districts in the country which are most backward in terms of human development indices. That means, and particularly on gender issues, there's a huge gap there in terms of learning, education, economic opportunities, industry presence, education institutions. So these are the districts where government is putting renewed focus on developing these areas. So these are not necessarily resource crunched areas. Some of them are have a lot of mines, have a lot of minerals there. So not mines, minerals there, and very rich in terms of culture, but they have not been developed because of infrastructure. Odisha is also one of those states. Fortunately for us now, Odisha has a very progressive state government, and it is in that sense getting easier for us to work there. Many women are illiterate. Of course, 20% is a general figure, but in these states, the literacy levels are much lower. And for women, and the districts where we are working, women don't have many opportunities. They are the most marginalized in terms of income, in terms of literacy, in terms of economic opportunities. In that context, what we are trying to do is to bring some of those women back to education, skilling, and enterprise. So agriculture remains the most favorite, also the most common occupation in those areas, and they have very small land holdings. And some of good part is when you're talking about digital literacy, some of these women farmers are using technology to access seeds, to access new ways of growing vegetables and selling them. So things are changing, but at a very slow pace. And illiteracy is one of the major barriers. We see that, but there have been multiple programs in India, not only our program SCE, but multiple programs in India which have worked to make women digitally literate, even though they were not literate in terms of education. So Odisha is a very interesting work area for us because women are very hardworking. They're keen to learn new things. State government is also coming out with new schemes and new policies, and they are trying to reach out to the most unreached women. So there's a combination of good practices in Odisha where there's problem, but there are also good solutions that people are working towards. We have two major things that ongoing there in terms of digital literacy. One, we are starting a training program for women to be entrepreneurs in the digital space. When I'm saying that, what we had in mind when we designed that program was that government has something called common service centers, and common service centers are authorized to provide government services, the last mile connectivity of the government in the villages, where they give e-services to the citizens. And many of these centers, common service centers, are being managed by village level entrepreneurs. We call them VLEs. And this is a public-private kind of partnership model. And we wanted some of our women to be VLEs. So we thought about it that let's start the training so that some of these common service centers could be managed by our women as VLEs. But we also realized while starting the program that there are several opportunities available to them in terms of e-commerce, in terms of being the last mile delivery, person. Also, providing e-services to people, e-governance through women. So there are several opportunities. So that is one initiative that we have, and we are very upbeat about it. So second is, of course, our our women empowerment hubs, through which, and these are equipped centers. So we want our women to come and take services from there, also learn from there. So because we have computers there, we have internet there. So if they want to use say internet to get some services from the government or from private sector or from the market, the center is available to her. If they just want to learn typing, that is also available there. So these are two initiatives which we think that even women with very low literacy levels can start using that. And we have seen some great results, and we are very positive that these are going to work well in Odisha. So the common service centers are being managed by government under the Department of Electronics. Digital Empowerment Foundation is an NGO which has been working in the digital space in rural areas for the longest time in India. There was a large program in India supported by Google and Tata Trust. Tatas are the big industrialists in the country, and they spend a lot of money and time for community initiatives. So both these organizations came together and ran a program called Internet Sathi. Sathi is a friend. So they were training rural illiterate women in using internet. It was a hugely successful program, and millions of women benefited from this. Of course, it didn't reach the scale that India desires, but it was hugely successful in reaching out large numbers. So Digital Empowerment Foundation was also a partner in Internet Sathi program. And so we are using their founder, Osama Manjar, to train our women in Odisha. So that's how we are quite upbeat that he will also bring in some of the good practices from his other experiences around digital literacy in the country.
Okay, thank you, Kanta. It's interesting, this concept of the peer learning, the friend keeps coming up again and again in terms of building that connectivity and literacy and scalability potentially as well, a network effect of learning. We're going to move on to our final speaker now, Shivi. Shivi Chandra leads curriculum and content strategy at Learning Equality, where she is interested in supporting marginalised communities, not only to use, but to lead, create, and find digital information pertinent to their lives and goals. Her background is in monitoring and evaluation, international development, and civic education, having worked on policy research for USAID, UNICEF, MIT, the National Science Foundation, and the Uberoi Foundation. Shivi studied international education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Johns Hopkins University. So UN Women has partnered with Learning Equality for the provision of a learning management system called Calibri. You saw it referred to in Erin's slides. So welcome, Shivi. We'd love for you to tell our audience today about Learning Equality and Calibri and how your organisation is seeking to bridge the digital divide.
Thank you, Sonali, and hello to everybody. Thanks to Dr. Young's talk, you all might have actually heard of Calibri, which is the system and platform that Learning Equality designs. We've partnered with UN Women to make that the foundational software for providing the digital learning resources to the UN Women country offices in the 6 pilot countries where the program runs. So in the next slide, you'll see just a little bit about what Learning Equality, our organization, does specifically. And we focus on the areas of software, training, and content. So that's the lens through which we approach digital literacy and digital preparation. So from the software side, we design and run Calibri, which is an open source platform that supports learning through digital resources without the use of the internet. So Calibri is designed to take digital resources which are available online and to make them available offline to people who aren't steadily connected to the internet. In that sense, Calibri is kind of a portal to a lot of other different resources, and that's where my role as the curriculum specialist comes in, selecting and modifying and adapting these resources so that through using Calibri, women can encounter a lot of different learning options and platforms and adapt them to their needs. And that's the second aspect of our partnership, recommending and building the library of digital learning resources individually for each UN Women country office. A great example of that is how Ina's organization, SisterWorks, has developed a lot of really interesting and very particular content on the vocational training skills and needs in that particular area. And we've been able to host that on Calibri for the women in the UN Women Australia Second Chance Education Program to take advantage of. And then the third aspect of our partnership is training and use of the platform and in the needed digital and educational planning competencies with the country offices for UN Women, as well as the implementation partners who are administrating. So here in this picture, you can see a little bit of the training from UN Women Mexico with some of our Learning Equality staff. So far, we've run 5 in-person in-country workshops in the pilot countries and 16 virtual workshops on training on these aspects of the SCE program. And so we've been able to interact and talk with over 200 implementing partner participants, as well through them with a lot of beneficiaries with the program. So I just wanted to today provide a couple of observations from our experience with doing that and how we found the practical experience of translating this type of platform, this type of content into a viable and successful learning experience for women in this demographic. The key kind of mental shift that we found was really necessary both for ourselves and for a lot of the partners that we worked with to make was kind of the shift from thinking about digital literacy as a set of separate competencies to digital literacy as it's needed for education specifically and as it's needed for learning. So the competencies that relate to just general digital literacy, which you might find in a lot of different frameworks, aren't necessarily the ones that are needed for a successful digital learning experience. On the next slide, you'll see how we at Learning Equality have kind of mapped out what we found through a lot of trial and error, not so much very systematic research, but certainly a lot of participatory design, a lot of adaptation based on the context and how the training has worked. This is what we think of as our most successful self-directed workflow for successful digital learning, which works for the women who we work with through the Second Chance Education Program, as well as the other users of Calibri worldwide, which are again, people mostly in low resource settings in rural areas, a lot of work in refugee camps, or in carceral settings like prisons, for instance, and who don't have the advantage of steady access to the internet. And so these are the steps which we've considered as important to develop as competencies which do have relation to digital literacy, but are also just a lot about developing self-directed learning competencies more generally. And these relate to things like confidently learning to navigate on learning platforms across resources and devices. We find a lot of people who are able to use, say, social networks or other types of technologies, but learning platforms are a very new type of technology for many people to use. They're not as intuitive. There's a very different learning curve. For women who are in low literacy situations, especially articulating the constraints of their learning environment to someone, it's a competency that I think, especially for many of us who have been privileged to experience education in a setting, especially in the rich world, for instance, we're very familiar with being able to say, like, for instance, I need accommodations in order to complete this task, or I need more time to do this, I need more support. But encouraging women who are marginalized to do this can really have a positive effect on their digital competencies, we've found, because it enables them to do the next thing, set adaptable goals based on the constraints, and find content which can actually help them meet those goals. And then the last three competencies are all about the learning part of engaging with the digital system. So imagining ways to utilize with the content that you see productively, not just looking at it on the screen or clicking through to the next one, thinking about how it can be discussed with others in group, how it can be shared with others. Sharing is a digital competency, but it's also an active imagination to think that this isn't just something that I have to read and consume. It's something that I want to save and share with somebody else. That's very much a competency associated with self-directed learning. Asking for support in a detailed and precise way. This is something we found we try to encourage because we know that it's very critical to not overburdening the staff who are in charge of these training programs if the beneficiaries are able to ask for support in a way that they really need. And then finally, the ability to self-assess their learning and communicate it to others is a competency that we try to build to help them advocate for themselves. With regards to the greatest challenge, by far, I think, especially as a curriculum specialist, what I've observed is that a lot of digital literacy tutorials, workshops, platforms, content, they're usually designed for those with steady access to the internet, and they make a lot of assumptions about how digital skills are learned, most of which don't hold true for the women in the areas in which we work. As an example, when I was scoping content for the Second Chance Education program, I looked through over 20 media literacy organizations and the digital literacy competencies and content that they offered, but I couldn't find one which had a very simple request from one of our program beneficiaries in the Cameroon office, which was, can you please give us some media literacy content which deals with WhatsApp and the proliferation of different types of news, especially public health information in WhatsApp. These media literacy curriculum were designed for those who mostly didn't use WhatsApp as their primary source of news consumption. They had very different needs. And likewise, we saw that when we integrated a lot of career training materials, a request that we received in UN Women Jordan was that a lot of the advice, which was designed for people who, say, had the ability to do things like update LinkedIn profiles and resumes, but these women were participants in an informal economy. It didn't really make sense to provide them with this information when what they needed was something about, say, how do you tell a gig economy job that is going to have exploitative dimensions from one which is actually going to give you flexibility? Another thing I was really pleased to see Dr. Young mention in her presentation, because it is something that we've heard mentioned a lot, that this isn't just about digital competencies. In these settings, digital competencies are wedded to things about understanding of the rights that women have in these situations, just more generally, information about how to advocate in their homes, in their families, and their schools to, say, maybe get a little bit more time with the device in their family as Kanta mentioned, so designing these types of materials with an eye to what women in these settings actually experience as challenges to their digital literacy has been a great challenge. And then the last thing I want to finish with is just what we found to be the greatest area of opportunity is that we worked with a lot of different women and heard about a lot of different stories of women, and we haven't really found many cases which really fit the type of rhetoric that we often see in the tech space specifically, that women may be very frightened of technology, or they're extremely ignorant about it, or they don't participate in it. Instead, we found that quite a lot of women have very eclectic profiles with regards to their use of digital technologies. For example, many of them have experience doing things like handling money and payments, managing social media and informal social networking. Public transportation, in many cases, takes a great deal of literacy with managing public information and government websites, things like that. And so we've really become interested in training schemes and training frameworks which leverage these existing types of digital literacy into the development of digital learning competencies specifically, and creating a shift from what's already there to the types of digital competencies needed to engage with learning platforms specifically. That's been something which we found to be a really positive turnaround for us, because we do really admire the work that the beneficiaries of these programs are doing in their own communities. They are leaders. They've often endured a great deal of hardship. They've created experiences and opportunities for themselves and their families. And so we want to find ways to respect the experiences that they already bring, and find the competencies in those that will lead them into successful digital learning experiences. So thank you very much for inviting us to share with more of you tonight.
Thank you so much, Shivi. I think your presentation just really brought home a lot of the themes that have come throughout all of the presentations tonight. That framing that you did in terms of the greatest challenges and opportunities at the end as well were really integral, reflecting on, the fact that Dr. Erin Young at the beginning talked about how access to internet is a key utility. It is a public good. It's almost a human right now. People without it have been missing out on telehealth opportunities during a lockdown. They've been missing out on homeschooling for their children. But things aren't sufficiently designed for women. We certainly know that through the program. There's not enough user platforms that meet the needs of women. So we've heard the most exciting opportunities about that in today's webinar, but there's not enough being done. There needs to be a lot more content aimed at the women to enable that democratic participation that you talked about as well, the advocacy, the engagement, so that future technologies, future AI also reflects this very large population that currently just really isn't represented online. We've run over time. I haven't seen any questions come through. I wonder if we can call on Dr. Erin Young to end out with that quote. I don't want to throw you on the spot there, but do you have it available? I think it could be a good way to end if you have it.
So it's a quote from something I wrote. So now I feel terrible calling it a quote, but I wrote a blog piece reflecting on the UN Women Report that I wrote in the COVID-19 context. So actually, I think it does wrap up all of the really brilliant talks that we've heard today. So I'll just read it. So going forward, we must ensure that technologies foster equality instead of becoming assimilated into the dominant structures of power. The era of the pandemic has opened up a space in which to rethink and redress, among other fundamental problems, equality and the role that technical systems ought to play. At a moment when technology is increasingly being marshaled to make choices of global consequence, we have an opportunity to emerge from these crises with a greater sense of the inequities that surround us and more importantly than that, a greater commitment to working towards justice through more inclusive and democratic practices of technological research and development.
Thank you. Thank you also to our audience for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. And thank you so much to our brilliant panel of experts that joined us. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone on here has. So thank you and good evening.